This is Legal Edge 6. Get ready to immerse yourself in real world law enforcement challenges and evidence based solutions. You belong here, the command center where instructors and supervisors turn the page to expert insights that drive trust and performance in the organizational culture.
The next voice you will hear is fearless and focused, holding you up to your greatness, not your limitations. The mindset shift begins right now.
Welcome back to the Command Center of Legal Ed 6. I am your host, Charles Rambo. Tonight, in Episode 4, we're taking on the issue of progressive discipline, something that supervisors avoid like it's a subpoena. Unions and attorneys, they come at it like it's a piñata. Swing hard and the loopholes will open themselves up to civil litigation. That's why tonight, particular for law enforcement managers, this is a full constitutional takedown of the tired toxic phrase. This is how we always have done it, especially for those of you who still treat documentation like it's a CYA memo. Cover your ass. Put a pin in it. Make note, because we're going hard on that tonight. So let's go ahead and set the record straight right now. That progressive discipline is not about simple paperwork. It's a strategy, a deliberate sequence of steps that can correct behavior before escalating to more adverse action. As General Colin Powell said it best, show them the way. But if after guidance, training, and documentation they still don't get it, then you have to show them the way to the door, to new horizons away from your agency. And when that back door swings wide open, here is the unchecked reality about progressive discipline. It's actually a reflection of your organizational culture. From recruiting to onboarding, who are you now letting back in the front door? As you return to your desk, are you building a culture of competence, or are you importing dysfunctional behaviors from another agency that banned poor performance in principle, but tolerated it in practice until it became a liability to their agency? I shared this with a Georgia senator in a subcommittee hearing, that I would rather work short-staffed with a team that is committed to excellence than people who are just hired to fill the slots.
So we have to be very meticulous and careful about who we're hiring nowadays. Be ye male, female, doesn't make a difference. We've got to be able to get into some more robust ways of getting qualified staff that can apply. And as you know, that's like pulling a needle out of a haystack.
Well, would you not agree that the Marine Corps does a really good job with it by not lowering their standards and continuing to raise their standards, even though they may be undermanned, if you will, for lack of a better term, that and what we found in many law enforcement agencies post-COVID is that a lowering of the standards, where behavior that is currently accepted was not accepted when I was hired in 85 and you came on, that we were held to a higher standard. And I worked in groups where we were subject to polygraph examinations at the whim of a supervisor, or drug tests at the whim of a supervisor, in order to maintain the integrity of the unit. Do you feel that raising the standards for law enforcement today would be a step in the right direction to prevent this infiltration that you speak of?
Well, you said it very correctly when you identified the Marines. That's why they call themselves the few and the proud.
Yes, sir.
They're not necessarily after every one. But I have to also go to my branch of service, Air Force. We aim high. We want to make sure that we're getting the most qualified. So as you said, you cannot lower the standard, but you can do a lot. And I'm a great fan of the SEAL team that otherwise uses a very small contingency to get the job done no matter where they're sent.
Thank you, Mr. Rambo.
If you are timid in managing human behavior, you're only enabling dysfunction in your organization. So the next time that you gripe about morale and performance, take a look in the mirror, because culture isn't always broken. Sometimes it's just a reflection of how effectively that you are training and directing and supervising the human capacity for the mark of excellence in your agency. This is where, when put into its proper perspective, that progressive discipline becomes the space to align the employee to what matters, the agency's mission. But if your approach and documentation reads like a breakup letter, you're not disciplining. You're only scrapbooking yourself to civil litigation. Now, we do take into consideration that some may work for at-will employers, where you can fire someone for any reason, but not an impermissible one. that is covered under the protected classes of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So in that moment and space, rather than to operate under a whim and caprice of managerial prerogative, why not build a workforce that is committed to your agency's mission that you can retain for long-term value? These expert insights into progressive discipline did not come from a classroom setting. It started when I became the chief steward of our deputies local union, right in the eye of a due process storm. Watch this. Internal affairs investigators and supervisors were treating discipline like a managerial prerogative of how we always have done things with no regard to employees' rights. That changed when I built a solid defense doctrine based upon Weingarten, Garrity, and Laudermill rights. Now our shift stewards were not just passing out feel-good pamphlets. We invoked constitutional protections and won at every level of the chain of command. Why? Because contrary to popular belief, civil service employees don't just have jobs, they have property interests in their employment as guaranteed by the 5th and 14th Amendment. Let me be very clear that our representation was not about protecting the alleged employee misconduct. But too often supervisors were beating the piñata of managerial prerogatives so hard the loopholes were being left open for constitutional deprivations. And when I transitioned into management in the agency, I didn't switch sides. I simply elevated standards. Under CompStat, I retrained supervisors and command staff in the art of progressive discipline. Even some of the managers and internal affairs investigators that I had encountered were mandated to attend the sessions. Now, the key performance indicators were directly being tied to use of force trends, misconduct, and other day-to-day operations. No guesswork, because the data told us exactly where the interventions were needed. But the old sweet joy comes in the morning moment came for me is where we saw something for the first time, that what was taught in the academy amongst instructors, supervisors were now in sync to ensure that that alignment of training from the classroom reached actual performance in day-to-day operations. The results? The Fulton County Personnel Board came to see for themselves just how and why disciplinary cases and appeals were drastically being reduced. These were my non-attorney expert insights that helped build my reputation that was gaining traction amongst national media that sought my commentary on such high-profile cases like Rashad Brooks in USA Today, the Fulton Sheriff Tactical Team rebranding in Atlanta First News, and Tyree Nichols on 11 Alive. So let me be very clear. As a supervisor, manager, and command staff member, you can no longer be intimidated by organizational culture. You are responsible for training, policy, and supervisory protocols that correct behaviors before they spin out of control in your organization.
Well, as you can imagine, a lot of reaction tonight to the video's release of Nichols' arrest.
Yeah, we want to turn now to 11 Alive's Cody Alcorn. And Cody, you got a few different perspectives on this.
Yeah, that's right. We wanted to reach out to several. We reached out to a retired law enforcement officer, a local attorney who deals with excessive force cases, and the NAACP. Their consensus by all three: Memphis police have a bigger problem on their hands that goes beyond this beating.
I cannot believe that this would be happening, especially after the lessons of the past few years.
Atlanta attorney Eric Fredrickson specializes in cases involving police excessive force.
I have to tell you, I'm also shocked.
A sentiment shared by attorney Gerald Griggs, president of the Georgia NAACP.
This was a really brutal beating.
Both attorneys believe this isn't a one-time thing within the Memphis Police Department.
This seemed to me from the onset like this was regular course of conduct. I would not be surprised if this was not the first time that this has happened, because for you to be that comfortable with that level of aggression, that level of language, that level of force with a body cam rolling.
There's no way that 5 officers could allow this kind of, to stand by and participate in this kind of conduct if it's not a widespread cultural problem.
A retired Fulton County Sheriff's deputy agrees with the attorney.
So for officers to continue to act above and beyond, and you know that you're being recorded, you would have to go back and look at the culture.
Charles Rambo also pointed out.
It comes back to the culture, behaviors that are banned in principle but tolerated in practice.
Now, another point brought up, rank. Why did the senior officer on scene not step in and say, hey guys, that is enough, stop this? And again, it's not about, a sergeant, a captain, it's just whoever the senior officer was, stop it.
And it is part of the culture. So when you think about it, when they're going through the academy, they're taught one thing when they're in the classroom, but usually when they get out there, sometimes you may have a wayward officer say, hey, rookie, I know that they taught you that within the academy, but this is the way we do it out here on the street.
It's going to be very interesting to see the DOJ comes in and investigates this department, what they find as far as the culture inside this, and has this been something ongoing for years?
Absolutely. All right, Cody, thank you.
Yeah, and there'll certainly be a lot of eyes on this as we continue to move forward. We do have a...
This is not 1960 what or 2020 who. This is conduct that even with Weingarten, Loudermill, and Garrity protections, you have the right and duty as a supervisor in each hearing to correct human behavior in your organizational culture, navigating the legal challenges with confidence.
The release of body cam footage showing Memphis police officers beating Tyree Nichols has prompted at least one Metro Atlanta law enforcement agency to reevaluate its own crime-fighting unit. Just like Memphis Police, the Fulton County Sheriff's Office has called their special task force the Scorpion Unit. Now, Sheriff Patrick Labat is considering a name change and a thorough review of the unit.
Proper training is a key.
Fulton County Commission Chairman Rob Pitts said he's not convinced these changes will make a difference.
And I know that there's an effort to change the name, but from my perspective, a rose is a rose no matter what you call it. So unless there's a change in training, and by training I mean not only the physical training, but the psychological training and in new policing tactics, whatever that means, everything, all of the results will be the same.
On the other hand, retired Lieutenant Charles Rambo believes crime-fighting units are vital to keeping communities safe.
We must get back to the facts of constitutionally based policing practices. And that's what I trained was in the Fourth Amendment, because everything that we do incident to a search, seizure, or arrest must be backed up by reasonable expectations to privacy.
He worked for the Fulton County Sheriff's Office for 28 years and even trained members of their Scorpion unit. He says it's about leadership and cultivating a proper culture.
Units have to be supervised by those supervisors and managers that are not afraid of culture. They must be able to stand up and step up and say that when something is constitutionally not in place, this is not going to be tolerated, because now you're going to discredit the unit.
So let's look at progressive discipline now from a neuroscience-based leadership perspective. If your disciplinary talk lasts more than 3 hours and ends with "don't let it happen again," you didn't correct behavior, you simply just cleared your conscience. The next time that you sit in the meeting, make it count in the space and time that holds the employee up to their greatness with presence, position, and power. From a cognitive standpoint, when you walk into the hearing, it is first your presence of your executive function that must be switched on. No emotions, no sarcasm, and no side eyes. Next, your presence without ever speaking a word aligns second to the position of your structural authority, the right to take action. But most important, third, is the power of your sapiential authority. Not the rank or title, but the superior wisdom that you demonstrate in the right to be heard and followed. That's when expert authority overrides the managerial prerogative lingo of, forget what you learned at the academy, you're going to do things my way. Come a little closer. Maybe that's the reason why the employee is in trouble and your CYA documentation is necessary. Nobody has time for that managerial prerogative talk. This is your opportunity now to demonstrate backbone and fortitude in holding up the workforce to correcting behaviors before more adverse action is taken. That's the definition of moving toward to mission-based leadership that is much needed in the progressive disciplinary process. So let me give you a few progressive disciplinary tips that I feel will help you get this process started. Number 1, problem identification. Please forgive me in advance for asking you to stop using the tired-ass managerial lingo that you have a bad attitude in order to justify why you're taking disciplinary action. What is the specific behavior as well as the policy and rule violation that you can cite and bring together to demonstrate that you had just cause for initiating this action? Number 2, verbal counseling. Did it really rise to the occasion of a suspension or a termination for such a minor infraction? What is your sapiential authority as well as expertise to have a conversation that you memorialize to ensure that you have a record for the expectations that were set? Number 3, and probably the most overlooked tool in progressive discipline, is the plan of action. As discussed in episode 3, this is where you use a plan of action and key performance indicators to define what conduct should look like in correction. A time for monitoring, a time for reflection, a time to hold up the employee to their greatness. Number 4, the Employee Assistance Program. Don't let your rank and title dehumanize you from the fact that law enforcement officers, due to the nature of the work that they perform, may need some professional intervention for alcohol, drug, or family issues. It does not negate your progressive disciplinary process, but it does show that you took the humanity to seek help before moving to more adverse actions. And this is dependent upon the severity of the offense, which justifies and warrants suspension, demotion, or even termination. An economic pinch for the employee to understand that we mean business about improving your behavior to your level of greatness. And last, one of the most unexplored avenues of correction of behavior is the reentry plan of action. Documentation for those employees who return from suspensions, and now you have the opportunity to define what success looks like in an organization built on excellence, a time to hold them up to their greatness, to become a part of a pipeline of leadership to carry on the mission, not based upon failure, but based upon continuous improvement. If you follow these simple steps with objectively prepared documentation, the imperative for the employee to improve isn't your burden. Their resistance isn't your guilt. When your documentation is precise, even the Supreme Court will affirm your case. So in closing out tonight's podcast, I admit that I've defended employees who were dead wrong, and I've trained managers who were absolutely right, but could not write. Justice does not care about your intent. It only cares about just cause. So ask yourself right now in the countdown, am I documenting dysfunction or enabling it? Am I enforcing values or avoiding confrontation? In an age and era where law enforcement agencies are scrambling to fill positions, remember that progressive discipline is not measured by how many people you suspended or got terminated, but by how many people that you helped to raise up to a standard of excellence. If that realization made you say, ouch, good, that's the sting of self-reflection. But if it also made you rethink your leadership style in the progressive disciplinary process to hold people up to their greatness, I've achieved my goal in this podcast. And you don't need a six-figure consultant to get the process started, although I'll take your call if you do. What you need is just one small step. Scan and download the free manual, The Art of Progressive Discipline, Navigating the Legal Challenges with Confidence. And when you are ready to take your learning to a whole different level on progressive discipline, check us out at Criminal Justice Online to enroll in a 101 or cohort session where you will earn 4 hours of credit as reciprocated by your state's post counsel. Now, I will be taking 1 week off in order to catch up on some appointments for training that have resulted from this podcast. In the meantime, get ready for episode 5, where we're going to go into another critical issue: sexual harassment for law enforcement agencies, where silence is not an option. Fearless and focused on evidence-based results. I am Charles Rambo, and I'll see you next episode in the Command Center.